Hey, this is Dr. Drew, and today we're going to be talking all about men's health and testosterone levels, as well as testosterone replacement therapy. I deal with a lot of men's health in my practice, and I'm seeing people range from 20 all the way up to 60 or 70 constantly ask me about testosterone levels. Should I do TRT? What are the side effects? Should I check my testosterone levels? And so on, because what we're finding is an epidemic of deficiency. It was once thought that people started to lose their testosterone levels and they started to decline at around age 30, but we're seeing it even earlier now because we're not living on planet Earth anymore in many ways. The environment has changed a lot. The food supply has changed a lot. We have a ton of EMFs and signals that we can't actually see, but they're really affecting our endocrine system, okay? So guys now don't even have as much testosterone as their grandparents did when they were alive. So we have about half of what our grandparents did from about 2-3 generations ago. So the decline is obvious. Yes, you should probably be checking this level regardless of what age you're at. But then the question of, okay, is it low? Is it low normal? Should I go into TRT? And so that's the sort of stuff I want to talk about right now, because testosterone should not be taken lightly. It affects about 14 other things in your body, and tiny shifts and tiny amounts of hormones have profound effects in our systems. They also have side effects if you overdo it and you don't track your blood and you don't keep an eye on it. That's my plea for a lot of people out there, is it's one thing to do it, it's another thing to track it. So if you're gonna do it, you owe it to yourself to keep an eye on your system. Always have a look under the hood every so often if you're going to engage in this kind of activity, because it's not without consequences. Both good and bad, but it's not without consequences, okay? Generally speaking, if someone is in their fertile years, say they're in their 20s and 30s, and they want to have a family or they're trying to conceive, it's probably best to not bring testosterone in the mix because it has effects on fertility. And this is something a lot of guys don't know. So that's why typically, if guys haven't had a family yet, or they're unsure, or they're trying to conceive, you probably don't want to look into testosterone replacement until at least 40 years old. Maybe earlier if you can make a good argument for it, but it has to be case by case, because as we touched on, it starts to fade, 25, 30. But by the time you're 40, that's something to maybe consider, but only if you've been tracking it and only if the clinical picture makes sense. And we should go through the clinical picture and the signs and symptoms first before we get into too much of testing and diagnostics. But symptoms and signs, the big ones are fatigue, loss of muscle mass, lack of libido and sex drive, no morning woods. So this is almost one of the best ways to diagnose it. If you're not noticing morning wood at least 3 or 4 times a week, and you're not having that erection, or you're not waking up with one, that's a pretty good sign that there may be something off. So if you tick enough boxes with that, then it's appropriate to start doing some testing, see where your testosterone's at. But you also need to make sure you check a whole bunch of other stuff too. You should also look into estradiol levels to make sure you're not moving too much testosterone to estrogen. You should also look at sex hormone binding globulin, because that tends to raise with age, and that is a molecule that can bind up testosterone and render it useless. So you may have a lot floating in your system. It gets grabbed up by SHBG, and then it doesn't get to the tissue level to do its magic. You also might want to look at LH and FSH, especially if you're on testosterone or you've done it in the past, because that can suppress your endocrine system using exogenous injectable testosterone, and that can impact your LH and your FSH. So it's important to check those. Some other side effects of testosterone use and just good things to check with men's health: check the lipid and cholesterol levels, check the insulin and blood sugar, check the inflammation, check the thyroid, and check the cortisol. These are all critical because, say I run a test on a 25 or 30-year-old male. They haven't done TRT in the past, but their testosterone comes up low. Is it appropriate to just throw that person on testosterone, or should we back it up a little bit and go, okay, you're 28, you're otherwise pretty healthy, you have the signs and symptoms of low testosterone, and now it's documented that your testosterone is low, so you're not making a lot. The next question should be is, why is it low? And that's why checking all those other parameters is super important. It could be a micronutrient deficiency. It could be high stress, high cortisol blocking your production of testosterone, because if your body is in a stress state and it feels like it's running from a saber-toothed tiger all the time, your sex hormone production gets pushed to the back burner. So it's simply not going to give enough substrate to that side of the hormone cascade, and you're not going to produce testosterone. It also could be coming from insulin resistance or blood sugar problems. So it's always important to check that, because there's a backdoor pathway that high levels of insulin basically just blunts the production of testosterone. Also, what about body fat? Body fat is an estrogen making machine, because body fat contains an enzyme called aromatase. And when aromatase mixes with testosterone, it generates estrogen. So now your hard-earned testosterone gets lost to estrogen. So if you have too much body fat, that needs to be dealt with. You can't just pump testosterone into that system and not expect any side effects, because trust me, there will be. You'll lose a lot of it to estrogen. You can develop gyno and man boobs and all kinds of stuff. So that's where you got to get really lean. Thyroid is another one I mentioned. Thyroid is this little butterfly-shaped gland. I've done a whole video on it, so check the link here if you want to know more. It controls metabolism system-wide. It also communicates directly with your testicles. It tells them to push out testosterone. So if thyroid's off, the blood sugar's off, if you're overweight or have too much body fat, or the cortisol's not being dealt with, it's like there's your causes. Fix the causes, and then the testosterone levels will come up. Also, low muscle mass, not doing resistance training and working out, horrible recipe for low testosterone. So it's not just as simple as, oh, someone's low, let's just shoot them with exogenous testosterone. Why would you do that when you have all these other causes staring you in the face? Now, there may come a time, say you're dealing with a 40-year-old. He's in shape, he works out a lot, little body fat, thyroid's good, cortisol's good, insulin is low, blood sugar's balanced, and he's just experiencing what's called andropause, or the natural falling of testosterone levels. That may be a case where you want to use some TRT. And it's just about replacing the physiologic dose, not supraphysiologic levels. Where I see a lot of guys go wrong is they'll take 300, 400, 500 milligrams of this stuff a week, and it totally blows their system, and it's way more than they need. And they might feel great at first, and then it starts to fade off, and they think, okay, I should double down and go more, and you're just kind of forever chasing the dragon. And that is not a good place to be. You want to do physiologic replacements. Typically, most guys and their testicles are putting out 10 to 15 milligrams of testosterone a day. So it makes sense for a lot of people to somewhere settle in between maybe 100, max 150 per week. I don't think that's an egregious amount. That seems to be a good physiologic sweet spot to sit in. But of course, this is case by case, person by person. Body weight comes into consideration here, and then blood levels. Also, there's a little bit of research showing that if you do that dose in 2 divided doses, so you're getting like a slight pulse on Monday and then a slight pulse on Thursday, you get better results as opposed to giving a huge bolus of testosterone at once, because naturally your endocrine system is outputting these hormones on the daily. So it would make sense to spread it out a little bit, okay? Also, if you're going to do it, there's some things you need to know. The side effects are, it can increase your cholesterol levels. Now, normally increasing testosterone increases HDL, which is a beneficial and protective cholesterol. So it actually can help balance your blood lipid profile, but if you take too much, it could jack up your LDL and total levels, which we know could be a slight risk factor for heart disease or atherosclerosis or plaquing of the arteries, but usually that's from insulin, inflammation, and blood sugar problems. So when all that kind of comes together in a perfect storm, like elevated cholesterol, high insulin, high blood sugar, high inflammation, that's when you really worry about that. So if you keep your insulin, body fat, and inflammation in check, slight increase in cholesterol, if it's likely just due from HDL, is less concerning, but you need to keep an eye on cholesterol because it can go up in response to using TRT. Another big one is the blood will thicken, okay? When you take exogenous testosterone, it increases EPO, which is a signal from the kidneys to output more red blood cells, which thickens your blood. And I use this analogy. Your heart wants to pump blood around the system, and it really likes it when it's the viscosity of water, really easy on that pumping mechanism. But what happens with TRT is you start to output more red blood cells, the viscosity of the blood becomes a lot thicker, and now your heart has to pump maple syrup around your system, which is super hard on it. So it can lead to a risk, with clots and blockages, but more importantly, high blood pressure is a big side effect of this. So you got to monitor your blood pressure, and quite often people using TRT are not keeping an eye on their blood pressure. So the easiest fix is to donate blood at an interval that keeps your levels good, because if you donate too often, that can deplete you of all the vitamins and minerals, particularly iron. So you don't want to overdo it, but you want to be able to donate enough so that the thickness of your blood is not a problem. And then the other one that I was saying to track is the estrogen. You could be moving way more estrogen from testosterone than you think. And if that's the case, that needs to be addressed. Either you're not lean enough, you need to do some supportive stuff to keep the aromatase down, you need to do estrogen clearing things like DIM, I3C, sulforaphanes, calcium D-glucarate. These are wonderful liver supports to escort estrogen out of the system, because if that builds up, that can lead to gyno and breast development and potential surgeries and removals of lumps and all kinds of stuff that's easy to avoid if you get the testosterone dose right, if you stay lean and you support suppressing aromatase as well as escorting estrogen out of the system. This is super important. And then of course, diet and sleep. Like you can't cheat any of that. You can't just replace the testosterone levels, not sleep, not exercise properly, eat a crummy diet, and expect miracles. It simply doesn't work that way. So you got to get all the other pillars of health in order before you just embark on this journey. Okay, it's not a free pass. You still have to put in your dues every day when it comes to achieving lifelong good health. Like rent is due every day. You can't take days off with it, and you can't just expect 100 milligrams or 150 milligrams of testosterone a week to save you. And if you're not monitoring all those side effects, you could be setting yourself up for disaster. And it's so easy to keep an eye on those things. And also, if you're going to use TRT, you got to use PCT, which is post-cycle therapy, which is to restart and re-kick the endocrine system every so often. PCT is usually a combination of, Clomid or clomiphene as well as HCG. This helps reboot the suppression of FSH and LH, which is signals that come from your brain to your endocrine system. That just gets completely cut and fried when you're using testosterone, because your body's like, well, I have this testosterone coming in. It's exogenous. It's from somewhere else, but we have enough floating through the system now. So we'll just power down. And the testicles are like, I don't need to output any because there's more than enough on board. But you can get testicular atrophy. As I mentioned earlier, it can affect fertility. So when you do post-cycle therapies after stopping testosterone with clomiphene, Clomid, as well as HCG, it reboots that axis. It keeps it running strong and fresh. And so if people are using TRT or they still might want to have kids and they're concerned about fertility, this is even more important. And just in general, I think to keep the endocrine axis revived and functioning properly, PCTs are something you must also look into. And so grabbing it randomly from people you bump into at the gym is not what I advise. It's seek out professional help, get tested, make sure you're tracking some of these things I just mentioned. Consider breaking up your doses and just doing it in a different way than maybe you were told or first learned about. So if you have questions, drop a comment below. If you feel a friend of yours would benefit from this, please share it with them. And as always, thank you for watching.